Good morning and welcome to the Planning Hearing Officers hearing for July 15, 2015. My name is Laura Stotler and I'll be serving as the Planning Hearing Officer today. We have one case and relevant exhibits are posted on the panels located directly behind me. The agenda, staff reports, and recommendation for each of the cases can be found on the city's website. A copy of the hearing procedures are available on the counter by the front door. There you will also find copies of the agenda and copies of the staff report. Under the provisions of Title 30, Chapter 30.43 of the Glendale Municipal Code, a variance shall be granted if four required findings are present. If you have a question on what those findings are, you can go take a look at the handout by the front door. That's also outlined in the staff report that you can also obtain a copy of. Notification of this hearing was accomplished by the use of public notices, which were mailed to property owners and occupants located within 500 feet of the subject property. A sign was physically posted on the city's site, and there was also an advertisement placed in the local newspaper and also posted on the city's website. Hearings will proceed as follows. I'll read a description of the requested entitlement. The case planner will then make a brief overview of the case, give an analysis, and make a recommendation. The applicant will then be asked to come forward, stating both name and address, and they will be asked to present the case within a 15-minute time limit. Others in support of or in opposition to the application and interested parties will be asked to come forward to speak, stating both name and address, and they will have a 3-minute time limit. Lastly, the applicant will be given the opportunity to make closing comments if desired in response to testimonies given by preceding speakers, and they will have a 5-minute time limit. The hearing will be closed and the case taken under submission. After this hearing, the decision will be prepared in writing and will be in the form of a letter sent to the applicant and to all persons who have responded to the public notice, either by speaking at this hearing or who have submitted written responses and who have provided their name and address. The date of the decision will be the date appearing on the letter. However, if a decision is made at this hearing, I can assure you it won't be. They would also have a 15-day appeal period from this date. Under the appeal provisions of Title 30, Chapter 30.62 of the Glendale Municipal Code, the decision may be appealed to the Planning Commission within 15 days of the date of the decision. Anyone wishing to appeal may obtain forms and brochures on the procedures from the Permit Services Center located in room 101 of this building. If you wish to speak, please write your name and address on one of the speaker's forms, these green forms, which have been provided by the front door, and submit it to our planning assistant. I'd also like to inform everyone that the official proceedings of this hearing are being recorded and are part of the public record. And I also want to warn everybody, again, the microphones in this room are always on. We have no control over them. So please be aware that if you're whispering out in the audience, it will be picked up. And I will have to stop the hearing if it turns out that our TV folks cannot pick up a clear recording of the hearing. So I'm just letting you know you're welcome to go outside and take your conversations there. So for the first case, it's located at 1100 to 1108 North Brand Boulevard, mitigated negative declaration, and variance case PVIR 150422. It's a continuation of a case from the June 24, 2015 agenda. Applicant is R. Malajajian of Alajajian Marcusi Architects. Case planner is Vilia Zematitis. This is an application for variances to allow for the construction of a new 5-story mixed-use project consisting of 18 residential units, 3,000 square feet of restaurant space on the ground floor, and 81 on-site parking spaces on a 15,500 square foot corner lot. The project requires approval of variances to allow an increase in height, number of stories, density, floor area ratio, and lot coverage, and a reduction in setbacks and additional open space for the residential portion of the project. The Planning Division, after conducting an initial study, has prepared a proposed negative declaration and final negative declaration for this project for consideration by adoption. And any adoption of environmental document must be done prior to any project approvals. So with that, I would like to ask the case planner to provide an overview of the project.
Good morning. As noted by Ms. Stotler, the case involves a proposed 5-story mixed-use project located at 1100 through 1108 North Brand Boulevard. The variances are being requested for this 5-story mixed-use project involve, as mentioned, both the increase in height, number of stories, density, floor area ratio, lot coverage, and a reduction in setbacks and additional open space for the residential portion of the project. If you don't mind, I'm going to go up to the board just briefly to give a contextual overview before discussing the details of the project. So move this over. Just don't want to move this. Okay. The project site is located on the northeast corner of Brand Boulevard and Dryden. The entire block face north of Glen Oaks on Brand Boulevard is currently zoned C3, Height District 3, which is the highest height district in commercial zoning, with an overall height limit of 90 feet, 6 stories for commercial structures. The residential portion to both the east and to the west off of Brand Boulevard are zoned R1250, which is a high-density residential zone. The project site itself currently features several smaller one-story commercial buildings that will be demolished as part of the project. Currently there is a recess cafe, several personal and office uses, and a number of storage buildings as well. Recess Cafe, again, all of the buildings will be demolished as part of the project, yet the new mixed-use project will incorporate Recess Restaurant into its ground floor, 3,000 square foot restaurant space. Just south of Dryden is St. Mark's Church, and again, it is Zone C3. Across the boulevard on Brand is a 2-story residential project. On the southwest corner, you have a 3-story boxier commercial building. In regards to the Brand Boulevard, you'll notice that there is a mix of both residential, commercial uses. There is a 5-story commercial building on the west side of Brand Boulevard, and then there's also a 9-story mixed-use residential condo office tower on the southwest corner of Dryden and Stalker. I'm going to go back to my seat. Now, C3 permits mixed-use development. So in terms of the uses, the proposed project is consistent with the zoning standards. In C3, however, the residential portion of the project has to comply with the R1250 standards. The R1250 standards is, as stated, would be a high-density residential zone, such as all the other higher-density residential zones throughout Glendale. Now, the applicant is requesting variances the variances are solely for the residential portion of the project. The residential portion of the project consists of 18 family-size condominium units. There are 11 3-bedroom units and 7 2-bedroom units for a total, again, of 18. And then you have the 3,000 square foot restaurant space on the ground floor. The project is providing the code-required parking being 2.5 cars for each of the 3-bedroom units, 2 cars for each of the 2-bedroom units, a quarter guest space per unit, and 10 parking spaces for every 1,000 square feet of restaurant area. So by code, the project is required to provide 77 parking spaces. The project is providing 81 parking spaces with a surplus of 4 spaces. The project is also in compliance with code with regards to open space. Code requires 40 square feet of open space per unit. The project is providing 112 square feet on average. Based on public open space, there's a requirement of 200 square feet per unit. The project is providing 216 square feet on average per unit. So it does meet the private open and the public open space. Now, in regards to the variances being requested, one would be for the height. In the C3 zone, the height limit is 6 stories, 90 feet if it was a commercial building. However, when you apply the R1250 standards, that height limit goes down to 3 stories or 36 feet. So they are proposing a project that's 5 stories and 62 feet in overall height. So they are requesting both a height and number of story variances. Based on the lot size of 15,500 square feet by the R1250 standards, because the lot is greater than 90 feet in width, they would be allowed 1 unit for every 1,000 square feet. So by code, they'd be allowed 15 residential units. They are proposing 18 residential units, are requesting a variance for density. The R1250 standards also have a floor area ratio limit of 1.2, meaning the total square footage of the residential space in regards to the lot area. The project in this case, with its additional variances, is requesting a floor area ratio of 1.9. In regards to the lot coverage, there is a 50% lot coverage maximum required or permitted by the R1250 standards. The project is proposing an 85% lot coverage. In terms of the street front, side street, and interior residential setback averages, again, when you look at the R1250 standards, the street front would be 23-foot minimum, 26-foot average, and I can either go into all the details or they are illustrated and in the staff report, but there are significant setbacks for the street front, side street, and interior setbacks. In this case, the project is proposing variances for all three. In regards to the rear, and just to clarify that, because I know that I received a number of letters stating that there was only a 1 inch or to 1 foot setback and the interior. I'll just have you know, and if you don't mind, I'm going to go to the board. The project is requesting street front, which would be Brand, and side street, which would be Dryden setbacks. So those are within 1 inches to feet along the street front, side street setback. They're also requesting an interior setback along the north property line of 1 inch, and this would be adjacent to the 3-story boxier commercial building to the north. The project itself is providing 31 feet free and clear from the 1st story to the 5th story on the interior easterly portion, adjacent to the existing 3-story apartment building to the east. So they do provide the required setback on the easterly side. They have 31 feet from the 1st floor through the 4th floor, and they provide, I believe, up to 54 feet of a setback on the 5th floor. So they are not building, contrary to several letters, there appears to be confusion that they were going up to 1 inch or 1 foot along the interior easterly side. That is not the case.
And I do have a question. If it was a commercial building and didn't have any residential, then they wouldn't need a setback variance, correct?
Correct. If it was a purely commercial building, they would be allowed to build up to the property line, both on the street front, side street, and interior. However, because they are adjacent to the residential portion, they would need a setback from the residences on the east. Last but not least, they are requesting the reduction of additional open space with additional residential setbacks above. Now, this is the code section that deals with when you have an increase in density of 1 unit for every 1,000 square feet, there is a code requirement that requires projects to provide additional open space adjacent to the street level. And this would be above and beyond what is required by code for both public and private open spaces per unit. And so again, based on the project, they're not providing any of this additional open space at the street level for the residential portion, though they are providing an outdoor seating area all along Dryden and Brand for the restaurant on the ground floor. Now, these are the variance items that are being requested. As mentioned, the 4 findings have to be made in order to grant the variances. When you look at the C3 standards and apply the R1250 standards, there have been no mixed-use projects ever proposed or approved that meet both the C3 and the R1250 standards. So there is no history of any mixed-use projects in a C3 or C2 or C1 zone that comply with the R1250 standards for the residential portion. We've had 2 projects that have been approved back in 1997 and in 2004 with similar setbacks, lot coverage, those types of height restrictions, and those variances were approved both for mixed-use projects in 1997 and 2004 for similar projects. But again, those projects required deviations from code in order to provide the residential portion in a commercial zone. So, based on the development standards and the hardships that are constrained in the actual development standards themselves, staff took a look at this particular project site. It is located on North Brand Boulevard. The Brand Boulevard at this location has 130 feet roadway width, which is one of the widest streets and a major arterial in the city. It's also located on a corner location with visibility and airspace on Dryden. So based on planning principles, if you are going to concentrate mass and scale, it's best to concentrate it on a corner location that has a wide roadway width in order to sort of grant and give relief to a mixed-use project. When it comes to C3 zones, which is, again, the most intense of all traditional commercial zones, the stretch of North Brand Boulevard is also more developed than in the traditional C3 zones located on South Glendale Avenue, East Broadway, East Colorado Street, in the area surrounding Sonora, Western, and Victory Boulevards. So it's already, by its own very nature, more intense than the standard C3 zones. Also, in regards to the context, when it comes to adjacency and structures, they provide the buffering from the residential uses on the east. So there is a 31 linear foot setback for the building. They are providing surface parking at that location and a landscape buffer for additional screening from the adjacent residential uses. There is a driveway on Dryden, so there will be traffic going into and out of the garage itself, but primarily the traffic will be focused on Brand Boulevard. And it's also been noted, as reviewed by our traffic and transportation staff, that this particular project does not have any impact based on our traffic standards, because when the traffic and transportation staff looks at a project, they look at the peak AM and peak PM traffic counts for a particular project. In this case, with 18 residential units and 3,000 square feet of restaurant space, that is well below that threshold limit. So by the city standards in this case, there is not a traffic impact. Now, it was also noted that the variances are for the residential portion of the project. If this was a commercial project, the actual building envelope would be permitted by code. Again, you wouldn't go through the variance process, you'd still have to go through the design review board process, and the design review board would be charged with looking at the compatibility of the project to the adjacent contextual setting. So they'd be looking at mass and scale and design and site planning. But the actual building envelope could be much larger than what is currently proposed. It's the mere fact that it's a mixed-use development that has to comply with the restrictive R1250 standards that put the project in this special category of being required to go through this variance process. So there's been a number, I'm going to go through, in regards to the general plan, and I just want to quickly make note of it. The general plan is very supportive of mixed-use projects in commercial zones. Our design guidelines specifically call out that commercial projects be sited in such a way where the commercial project portion is sited against the street, basically brought up to the street. Parking is at the rear, that the street is activated along the front, which in this particular case, the project is proposing outdoor cafe. They're proposing to build the building all the way up to Brand, all the way up to Dryden, which would be consistent with the design standards that are set forth in the citywide design guidelines. As such, again, when you require the 20-foot minimum, 23-foot average on the first floor, the R1250 standards, when you apply those strictly, it would create an impractical hardship and extreme difficulty in terms of trying to meet code, yet at the same time, you're in opposition to the required design guidelines of the city, not the required design, but the citywide design guidelines, and also basic planning principles whereby you want to concentrate the building at the corner location and then concentrate the mass and scale there. Again, there's been a number of letters. Public involvement and comment has been absolutely intense in this particular case. I myself have received over 115 emails. Okay, there was also a meeting by the Rossmoyne Mountain Homeowners Association at the St. Mark's on June the 18th, which staff attended. There was a great turnout. There was an absolute great turnout at this meeting. This is the public process. So this is where staff makes a recommendation based on the context and the various factors with the, limiting the R1250, or I should say limiting the multifamily residential development in a C3 zones. Staff generally is supportive of granting variances for this particular project. Now, the planning hearing officer has the ability to, obviously, to consider all of the various inputs. As I mentioned, there were a number of letters. There were 61 letters in opposition as of 9:20 this morning on the hearing date. All of those letters are part of the case file and will be on permanent record. I believe there will be more submitted. And there are 15 letters in favor of the project. Most of those letters with regards to the number of variances, also the mass and scale of the project, and the sense of development creep from the downtown into the North Brand Boulevard, which is the residential portion. Again, staff acknowledges those concerns. If the project was amended or made smaller, it would still need variances. Let's say if there was a floor that was cut off to 4 stories, or if there were other issues, it would still need variances, both for the height, the setbacks, the additionally required open space. So even if the project was smaller or whatnot to made in terms of mass and scale, again, you would still need the variances that are requested, though obviously it would not be to the dimensions and the measurements that are proposed in this particular project plan as featured on the boards behind the hearing officer. Last but not least, prior to consideration, there is a requirement for the planning hearing officer to consider and adopt the proposed mitigated negative declaration. An initial study was prepared by staff. The final mitigated negative declaration was submitted as part of the staff report. There are mitigation measures upon the review that deal with the short-term construction noise impacts. So there are mitigation measures that are included in the final mitigated negative declaration. There were 28 letters that were specifically geared towards the environmental document that were actually addressed in the final mitigated negative declaration. So that initial study and final MND, final mitigated negative declaration, excuse me, has been submitted for consideration by the hearing officer, and you have to obviously consider it before making a decision on the variance request. That concludes staff's presentation, or I should say not too brief presentation. The staff report actually and the draft findings were much more detailed, but I am available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. I don't have any questions at this point, but I do want to let people know that we have received a large stack of letters. I have read the ones that were all included in the online version of the staff report, and I've read many of the ones that have come in subsequently, but I do know ones came in this week, last night, and even this morning. I have not read all those, so I'm letting you know that while we have them here, I have not had an opportunity to read them all. So I understand that more letters are probably going to come in right now. So just want to let you be aware of that. In terms of the mitigated negative declaration, I do want to make a statement about one that there was a letter that we received from Mr. Howell. And there was concern that the original letter that was written did not specifically address comments to the mitigated negative declaration, and then subsequently we received a letter that said, no, these really were comments that should have been addressed in the mitigated negative declaration. I took a look at his comment letters, all of them. When we looked at the issues, they were letters and issues, there were issues that were already addressed in prior comment letters, or actually in terms of like parking, it was already addressed in the negative declaration itself. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I have received those letters. I have received all of his comments, and I am considering them as part of my consideration of this project. So with that, I would like to call forward then the applicant, Malajadjian, and you'll have 15 minutes. I do understand you have a large number of findings that need to be met, so if you do need additional time, let me know.
Sure. Thank you and good morning. For the record, my name is Malajadjian. The address is 320 Arden, in the city of Glendale. I'm the project architect as well as the applicant for this project. Given the 15 minutes, I'm going to try to make a short PowerPoint presentation of the project, and then probably like 5 minutes, and I'm going to ask our consultant, Mr. Rodney Khan, to address all the variance issues. So this is it. All right.
The lights dimmed or no?
Yeah, can we turn off? Good enough, I think, you know, to get some quality. Let's see. Somehow this is not picking up, Billy. So. We. Oh, it's the arrow. Okay. Yeah.
Is it too far from the computer?
Can you do it from there? Yeah, I'll say next slide. Yeah. Okay. Basically, when we started this project, we started with an overall the city plan, and at this first slide, you know, I'm showing the DSP zone and a C3 zone. The red section that you see north of Brand Boulevard, that's Central White Street, is the Brand Boulevard, and then the red area is the C3 District 3 zoning, which is sort of a continuation of a downtown specific plan, as you can see it, you know, the north of Freeway. So we are located at the center of that, you know, the C3 zone. You know, so we're not north at the very end of the zone, but we're right in the middle on Stocker. So if the next slide. This is the view of the project site. You see the Recess restaurant. There's a hair salon next to that. The site been at this situation for many years. And the next slide you can see it's abutting to the commercial building on the north of it. There are some garages that left open and being used as a storage area. On the next slide we go. So this is the view from the looking from the Stucker all the way to to the Brand Boulevard. And on the next slide, we try to do some different studies and explore the ideas. What type of uses could go in this on this location. And we spent a good amount of time and going back and forth with the city staff and analyzing the location. So given the zoning of C3, this would allow us to build a medical or dental office building or, with outpatient surgical in there. We could have put 65,000 square feet building without asking any variances. This would be by rights. And that will require 325 cars parking for the 65,000 square feet medical office building with the outpatient surgical and any floor. So on the next slide, we also take a look at if this could have been a general office building. We can still go and not ask any variance. No variance would be required. And we could have put 65,000 square feet. And in this scenario where we have a mix of offices, such as insurance and contractor's office, that could be 195 cars would be required to be parked on the property. On the next study that we did, on the next slide, we could have mixed retail, which could have gone like a vertical mall, and then some urban areas they do that, and from jewelry shop to pawn shop, those could take another. As a commercial building on a C3 zone, we could go up to 6 stories with 90 feet height, and we could have gone to 65,000 square feet building again with 260 cars parked on the property. Now, the next study we did on this was we could have even a private club and a lounge, which could accommodate the banquet hall, and that would require the most amount of cars would be close to 400 cars to be located on the property. So we were thinking, what would be the next best use? Well, residential probably is the one. That would include inclusionary housing, and this will not require any variance given the fact that state gives us some exemptions on some of the height and the density. We could have have 3,000 square feet of a restaurant. We could place another 6,000 square feet of retail on the first floor and have 21 units instead of what we are asking, 18 units, and that will require 88 cars to have on the property. So we arrived to our decision, which was the next slide, is the proposed project. We decided not to go 90 feet and exercise 6 stories. We rather ask for 18 units mixed-use project, which we will be bringing back the 3,000 square feet of a restaurant area, which is Recess, will be coming back to the project, Recess Restaurant, and that would be on the first floor, and above would be the residential units. Now, the parking would be required for that is the 77. It has a lesser impact than any project we have examined for this property. So this lesser impact. Now, if you can see this slide, you can see that 5-story section basically facing to the Brand Boulevard. Now, on the next slide, we did a street profile, which shows if we're going to do a commercial project, any of those 5 or 6 projects prior to our proposed project, that would show on the top the 90 feet 6-story building, which is overpowering the church. However, across the street on the western section of Brand, you see the residential mixed-use tower on a north corner, and from down there you'll see the office buildings, next to fire station, and a 4-story office building, which is the height is matching almost to our height of the 5-story building, comparably. Now, on the next slide, we are showing our project that is much lower. It's 5-story on the Brand side again, and showing proportionally how it compares with both sections of the streets on the westerly and easterly side. Now, on the slide after this one, this is the rendering where if we go with a commercial project and would require no variances, and we can go 6-story, whether it's a medical, mixed use, or a private club, that could take this kind of a look and this kind of a massing, applying all the setbacks and going by no request for a variance. And the next one would be our project, which is proposed, and you can see how comparable it's in line with the neighboring projects, neighboring properties, actually, the church, and on your left you can see the high-rise buildings or mid-rise buildings. On the next slide, this is looking from a north to south, and you can see the office building that with no variance requirement would be placed on the property, and you can see the proportion comparing with the Carnation building, you know, the office tower, which is south of Glenox. And on the right is the mixed-use residential and the office building, medical office building next to the fire station. And the next slide would show almost the proportion of the project, that proposed project, that you can see how far down we're bringing the project on its proportion and making comparable with east and west side of the Brand. And a Brand is a commercial street, and you know it needs to take a commercial project or height and comparability. We're comparing with the Brand Boulevard. Now, on the next slide, this is the site plan, and I will go very quickly over the plans. If you can notice that the project's 5-story section is on the Brand side, and somewhat is on the street side or Dryden side. So we do have a large setback starting from a 31 feet up to 15 feet, up to 50 feet, like Vilya was mentioning. On the residential side, basically it's a 4-story project, and you can see it on the boards as well. If you look at those diagrams of the sections, the one at the bottom, you can see like 4 levels of building. So the 5-story section is mostly at the corner and at the Brand side. So on the next slide, so we're proposing to have that restaurant located at the corner, and we're providing 10 to 12 feet of a walkway or next to the sidewalk seating area, which would be covered, you know, protected from rain and sun for the customers of the restaurant. That's the area there, yes. And the restaurant would be, front of the restaurant will be set back about 12 feet, you know, from the street property line. So so that provides the commercial on a street level, we're pushing the building about 11 to 12 feet back. Same with the entrance to the lobby of the residential units, which will accommodate, will have the elevator. We have a separate elevator coming from the parking just for the restaurant customers, you know. And we have some surface parking on this floor. And on the next slide, we'll show that remainder of parking, the restaurant parking, will be accommodated on the second level, actually first ground level of the project, and then we will have a gate that would separate the residential parking from the customer parking. So the access to the condominiums would be only by key card or the opener, so you can get to that lower parking spaces. In that way, customers will not basically take over any parking spaces that would occupy by the residents. Now, on the next slide is our typical floor plan, which shows the inner garden, and we have units, 2-bedroom units and 3-bedroom units. Majority is 11 of them are 3-bedroom units. Now, while we're designing the project, we have taken into consideration very much needed the use or type of housing for the Glendale or this section of the city. Reason for that, you know, now let's not confuse this project with what's happening down on the Central Avenue or South and San Fernando Road. Those are apartment projects. Those are apartment units. Now, this is ownership, private ownership. They're condo projects. the smaller, like 1,350 square feet for 2 bedrooms, up to 1,900 square feet for a 3-bedroom unit, which will give you the ownership. We will have, this is very much needed use between the apartments and high-priced housing on the hills of Glendale or in the Rosemoyne area. So this kind of fills in very needed housing. Only 18 units. This is not 200 or 400 units that are coming up in downtown or in a DSP zone. So the 18 units are, basically designed to have ownership of the place, to have recreational areas, which is we're showing the recreation room, which will have a sort of a double height for the meetings for the residents, or having a small birthday parties, within their buildings. And we have a gym on the 3rd floor, as well as on the 4th floor we have a deck. So if we move on with the slides, please, Vilia. So this shows the upper floor, the gym, and next slide, please. This one shows the roofing configuration. So basically, the Brant side is 5-story, as well as the corner extending back here, and 50 feet from the property line, the entire deck that's also facing to the commercial building on the north. I could say like 75% of that portion is 4-story. And we in the sections you can see that as well. And the next slide, if you don't mind. Yeah, that shows the 2 level of subterranean and section of 4-story building. Yeah, and goes all the way to just the Brant side has that 5-story. The next slide, please. Those are the building elevations. We thought to, I'm not discussing architecture here because this is basically has to do with the design. But we thought to keep it very contemporary, very simple, with quality materials, such as, besides the cement plaster, we're going to have a wood application like Brazilian Ipe or composite wood. And most of it would be a view glass, because we appreciate the position that this property is. We want to have openness as we can continue the slides. We also place, this is looking towards the south, and that's the facade is looking to the north. Is basically the gray area is where the adjacent building, commercial building is, office building is. Now on the next slide, we put some interior shots at what we are envisioning to have for the project. Would be, those balconies would be large balconies. They're private balconies, the minimum of anywhere from 8 feet to 10 feet in depth, and almost the entire width of the living rooms. So you can see one of the slides here that from every single room. Next slide, please, Vilia. Like a living room would be open to its kitchen area, and a sitting area within it would be bringing a lot of air and light. Next slide, please. And quality designed and nice bathrooms in the kitchen areas, and the interiors where you can see how those openable panels. We're proposing to have openable glass panels at the balconies, and once it's open, the inside outside becomes one with their terraces. Okay, and this is the rooftop terrace area where we have, we're showing some conceptual ideas that could have little sitting areas where the residents could congregate and spend their evening out here. Next one, please. Okay, this is the project, and we're intent to put the quality project there, and this is, again, it's a condominium project, it's an ownership, and it's only 18 units. It's not to be compared with, I know the folks are here, they're all very upset about it, but this is not to compare with what's going on in the apartment projects where you have on those lots like 200 units or 120 units or whatever. This is my presentation. I reserve my time. I will ask Mr. Rodney Kahn, to come forward and basically address all these findings for the variances. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, Ms. Stotler.
How much additional time will you need?
If this shows me to have 1 minute left,
Yes.
I'll need a little bit. I'll need a little more than that.
Hey, that's it.
I'll probably need about 10 minutes. I'll try to do it. I'll try to do it in less than that, though. Good morning again, Ms. Stotler, city staff. My name is Rodney Kahn. My offices are located at 1111 North Brand Boulevard. I'm across the street from the subject property. The property, as shown by our architect, currently exists and is underutilized, need of upgrade and improvement, and I don't think there's a question about that. We are proposing a mixed-use project that's actually evolved over a number of meetings and discussions, starting off with your former Community Development Director, Hassan Haghani, and discussions that took place that looked at everything from the surrounding mix of land uses. So as was pointed out, there are institutional uses, there are commercial uses, there are residential uses. Also up and down Brand Boulevard, and if we focus our attention on just the 1100 block of North Brand Boulevard between Dryden and Stalker, you have buildings that are 1-story, 2-story, 3-story, 4-story, 5-story, and the Verdugo Towers, which is stated as 9. I don't know if it's 9 or 10 or 11, but it's a very, very tall building. That's a mixed-use project. That's just within that C3 zone, within that 1100 block of North Brand. The conclusion for our project, which our architect already highlighted, was that we would design something that was a mixed-use project. The restaurant that's currently on site would be brought back, and then we would build the 18, and as emphasized, 1-8 units of ownership, family, larger units on the site. That mixed-use component is what has driven us here today, which is if we had a solely residential project or if we had a solely commercial project of any magnitude, whether it was the 6 stories and 90 feet, 5 stories, etc., or 3 stories, it doesn't matter. They would all be permitted uses. We would not be here today. I thought Mrs. Zematitis did a very complete professional presentation. And as part of her remarks was that if we were to introduce residential with commercial on the property, that would cause problems because the zoning development standards are not designed for mixed-use projects. They're designed for single-use projects, and that's the big difference. Your general plan, your design guidelines, your zoning land uses allow for mixed-use projects, but your development standards do not. And there lies the inconsistency, and there lies the issues. As stated in the staff report, and we have a limited amount of time, I can expand on things, I can come back, I can file whatever information you need. But as it relates to the findings, I thought the findings were made and complete in the staff report. I think they were logical, and the conclusions can be drawn to grant the variances based on that. But I would like to take just a couple minutes of time to further expand on that. The first item, the strict application of the provisions of the ordinance, would result in practical difficulties or unnecessary hardships. For our project, the height and the number of stories was emphasized. We can go up to 6 stories and 90 feet, but for residential land uses, 3 stories and 36 feet. If you go to not just planning principles, but good urban planning principles, it states that buildings, taller buildings, higher buildings, denser buildings should be on the corners the street corners of these areas because it allows better for wayfinding, and there are a whole multitude of lists of good urban planning principles that are followed by designing the building in this manner. The density increase from 18 units instead of 15 units. So three additional units is what we're talking about. I can refer back to what I just said. The denser, taller buildings are to be on the street corners. If you look at a mix of uses as it relates to floor area ratio, in this case we're at 1.9, as opposed to the code requirement of 1.2. But what is left unsaid is that that additional floor area actually is for the commercial component, which is the ground floor restaurant, along with the residential lobby on the ground floor, along with the residential parking. The parking actually gets factored into the floor area because of the mix of land uses and because of what the R1250 standards state. The lot coverage of 85%, when you have inconsistent requirements where it says that the commercial design guidelines and the commercial component is supposed to be up against the street front, your residential component is supposed to be set back or stepped back significantly, that's a conflict with lot coverages. That's inconsistent. That does not make logical sense because you're already suggesting and stating you need to cover the majority of the lot, which does not allow for a 50% lot coverage. It far exceeds that just by following the zoning code requirements. The setbacks, and there were a list of them. There are a list of them for the front, for the interior, for the street side, for the first floor, for the second floor, and so on. These setbacks are appropriate for strictly residential environments. We're not in a strictly residential environment. We're in a commercial environment. And to have those types of setbacks in a commercial environment is inconsistent. Look at the buildings that surround us. Look at the buildings up on North Brand. Do they have those setbacks? No, they do not. All of these variances are for development standards that are consistent with a mixed use standard, but they are not consistent and differ from single use standards, which is what is on the site right now. The zoning code allows mixed use projects. The general plan encourages mixed use projects, yet the existing development standards create a hardship for a mixed use project. As it relates to the second finding, or expanding on that second finding, for exceptional circumstances, the mixed-use project is a unique and it is a desirable type of project in this area. Whatever the density is, whatever the heights are, whatever the requirements are, a mixed-use project, as was clearly stated, will require variances. To what level those variances are required is the conversation. But as it relates to encouraging this type of a project, this type of project requires variances. The project as we describe and as we discuss it, there's a exceptional circumstance if you want to state that we are very much on a street corner, we're in conflict with the general plan and conflict with design guidelines if we actually follow the zoning standards. The width of the street frontage was already identified, the 130 feet, which allows for light, air, ventilation, a number of different things, which is exactly what the setbacks are there for. The setbacks are there to provide light, air, and ventilation between structures. Do we have that? The answer is yes, we do. We have two street frontages. We have a significant setback on the east, and directly north of us is a box 3-story building. I'll conclude my remarks. I know that there are a number of speakers. I'll be happy to answer questions that you have. The long and short of it, the overall consensus is that if the project as designed, we would have development standards that were in place for mixed-use projects. This project would be meeting those standards. Thank you very much. If you have questions, I would try to answer them.
Have you had a chance to take a look at the different letters and things that have come in on this project?
Ms. Stotler, I've had a chance to look at some of them. Some of them were forwarded to us. Some of them I've read in the news press or letters that have been written in. Some of them I've looked at in that manner. I, by no stretch of the imagination, have looked at the amount of letters that you've looked at, though. But yes, I have.
Okay. And did you have any concern with the mitigation measures that were identified in the mitigated negative declaration?
No. And to speak to that, the environmental document, as we reviewed it, as it was processed and it was being analyzed, the suggested mitigation measures we have no problems complying with. The suggested conditions of approval that's being recommended, we have no problems complying with that either.
Okay. And I know you ran out of time, so if you have any written notes that you'd like to give me before the hearing ends, I'd be happy to take those.
I certainly will at the end of the hearing.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And with that, we have a number of speakers. The first group I'm asking to call up is going to be Ross Moyne HOA President Lorna Vartanian, and I understand that she's also working with Sean Burcell, so the two of you are welcome to come up.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. My name is Lorna Vartanian. I'm president of the Ross Moyne Mountain HOA. GMC Section 304340 states that the burden of proof to establish findings of fact is on the applicant. A reading of the variance application as submitted makes it clear that even the applicant is aware that the findings cannot be made for this project. On page 1, the applicant states that although the project does not meet all of the development standards as called out in the current zoning ordinance, the design and concept were derived from following the spirit of the mixed-use development standards adopted by the city in other urban areas. In other words, the applicant admits that they are not following code as it applies to this parcel, but rather are following standards established for other urban areas. We later learned that those urban areas are within the downtown specific plan and the San Fernando corridor, each of which has its own specific zoning laws. The applicant goes on to say that while the height and number of stories proposed is different than the R1250 height standards which must be applied, they meet the height standards allowed for a solely commercial building. This building is not a solely commercial building, therefore the argument does not work. The increase in height and stories is explained further by the applicant as a function of good urban planning principles, which encourage denser, taller buildings to be located on corners. That might be true, but certainly only in areas where the code allows for denser, taller buildings. They are not allowed here. Regarding density, the applicant states that if the density bonus ordinance, which allows up to a 35% increase in density when affordable housing units are incorporated, were applied to this project, more than 3 additional units could be added with even less parking. The problem with this argument is that affordable housing units are not being incorporated, therefore a hypothetical cannot be a justification. On page 2, the applicant states that the existing code, which does not consider mixed-use projects, did not envision or address residential floors above 3. But this is not true. GMC 30-1220 defines multiple residential dwellings subject to the provisions of the R1250 zone and provided further that the ground floor is occupied with permitted commercial uses as a permitted use in this district. In other words, the existing code for this parcel does, in fact, contemplate mixed-use development and makes it clear that the development must adhere to provisions of the R1250 zone. Finally, the applicant argues that the setbacks are most appropriate for strictly residential environments and that providing large setbacks would be out of place in this urban location. North of Glen Oaks, Brand Boulevard becomes a residential street in a residential neighborhood. While a commercial element exists, to compare this neighborhood to downtown Glendale is a stretch. This is a residential neighborhood with a small commercial component, and this proposal is the type of supersized urban development far exceeding the standards established for this area that the residents do not want creeping into our neighborhoods. And I'm going to submit a copy of the letter I just read, a petition that has been signed by a number of opponents and other associations who join with us, and a petition that was signed by the residents of Carmen Street in the Ross Moines area. I also am aware that a number of people who are opposed to the project will not be speaking today, and if I may, I'd like to ask that opponents to the project who are here today stand up quickly. And I thank everybody for coming out today, and I thank you for giving us this time.
Good morning, Ms. Stotler, and thank you. My name is Sean Bursell. I'm a homeowner who lives approximately 1.5 blocks from the proposed project. I'm also a member of the 1100 North Brand Steering Committee of the Ross Moines Mountain Homeowners Association, and as Ms. Vartanian noted, the Homeowners Association opposes the granting of the ordinance of the zoning variances for this project. Let me, before I start, note that the applicant was given 25 minutes. We were told, as representing the Homeowners Association, we would have 10 minutes. I would hope and anticipate that that 10 minutes would be extended to allow me to make my complete statement. While we in the Homeowners Association favor the redevelopment of the project, and we agree with the applicant, Mr. Khan, that this has been an eyesore for too long. However, the 8 variances requested for the project are unsupported and should be denied. Granting the variances would allow the erection of let's call it a McCondo, a structure that is inconsistent with the neighborhood and would have the effect of extending downtown Glendale north of Glen Oaks Boulevard, where it has historically ended. Now, the applicant said, and I thought this was a very telling comment. He said, well, you know, this C3 zone is essentially, it's an extension of the downtown specific plan. No, no, no. If the city wanted the downtown specific plan to extend up to Brand and Dryden, or actually up to Stocker, the city council would have done that. They did not do that. This is not part of the downtown specific plan, and what applies to the downtown specific plan should not be applied to this project. Now, the first point I want to make is that the applicant has failed to demonstrate that the project meets each of the conditions for each variance requested. As Ms. Zematitis correctly noted, and Ms. Stotler, you noted as well, the issue here are the variances and the 4 conditions for each of the requested variances. Now, according to the Glendale zoning ordinance, a variance may be granted only when it is found that all 4 of the conditions laid out in the ordinance are met for each of those variances. As has been noted, these conditions are demonstration of practical difficulties or unnecessary hardship. Number 2, the existence of exceptional circumstances or condition. Number 3, that the granting of the variance will not be materially detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the neighborhood in which the project is located. And 4, that the granting of the variance will not be contrary to the objectives of the ordinance. And the burden of proof under the Glendale Municipal Code to demonstrate the existence of each of these conditions for each requested variance is on the applicant. Now, I've read the application for the project. It is absolutely devoid of evidence that any one of these conditions, much less all 4, are met for any of the 8 requested variances. And I listened to the presentation of the applicant, and I must say I did not hear anything today that changes my opinion. That was a presentation that would be more appropriate for the Design Review Board than for this hearing. I also listened to the hired consultant, Mr. Khan, and again, they failed to make the case that these variances should be granted. And because of this failure, the application should be denied out of hand. The second point I want to make is that the case planner has improperly introduced new arguments not raised by the applicant. The draft findings in the planning hearing officer staff report attempt to fix the fatal flaws in the application for a variance by introducing new arguments not raised by the applicant to support the requested variances. Again, the burden of proof is on the applicant. It is inappropriate for the case planner, who is supposed to be the public's neutral arbiter, to attempt to cure the failure of an application to properly plead its case by introducing new arguments in favor of the granting of the variance that were not ever raised in a timely manner by the applicant. And so, accordingly, any of those arguments that are in the staff report that you have in front of you that were not raised in the application should be ignored. Third, and this goes to the heart of the matter, the project does not meet the requirements for the granting of the variances. As I've noted, the applicant has failed to make the case. The planning here, the case officer tried to fix that, but even at that, it fails. Now, the first condition is that there need to be practical difficulties and unnecessary hardship. We hear, oh, there are practical difficulties, there are unnecessary hardships. Not one has been mentioned except for the setbacks and open space requirements, and even those are not explained why those are difficulties or hardships.
Excuse me, how much more time do you need?
I will need approximately 4 minutes.
Okay, we can give
Thank
you
you.
5.
Thank you. And as I was saying, the applicant has failed to make that case, and again, the planning hearing officer staff report doesn't identify any specific practical difficulties or unnecessary hardships. The second condition is exceptional circumstances or conditions. The applicant failed to identify any of those except for the setback variance, and apparently, if I understand it correctly, the applicant appears to believe that a mixed-use project qualifies as an exceptional circumstance, which it does not. And then none of the supposed exceptional circumstances or conditions in draft finding number 2 in the staff report are indeed exceptional. All we've heard, it's located on a corner. There are 11 corners in that C3 zone. If this is true, that a corner is an exceptional circumstance, then a variance should be granted for every property on those 11 corners. We've heard that Brand Boulevard is 130 feet wide. Well, it's 130 feet wide from Mountain Street all the way down to San Fernando, 3 miles long. If that 130 feet is an exceptional circumstance, then everyone on Brand Boulevard gets a variance. We've heard that there is an intense development pattern in the district and a dense setting of the location, and compares it to, mind-bogglingly to me anyway, to other areas of Glendale that are much more densely developed. So I think those exceptional circumstances are demonstrably untrue, and so none of those are exceptional. The third condition is that the granting of the variances not be materially detrimental or injurious. And in fact, it says that the staff report says that would not be materially detrimental or injurious. In fact, the opposite is true. The project would be a jarring intrusion into the existing transitional nature of the neighborhood, a 5-story structure with essentially no setback jutting up on the corner of North Brand and East Dryden would mimic the look and feel of downtown Glendale rather than being compatible with the existing neighborhood. The corner would lose its openness and transitional feeling, and the injury to the neighborhood would be real and substantial. And if you don't believe me on that point, look at the 90 people who are here saying, do not do this to our neighborhood.
We're going to be quiet. Okay, like I told everybody before, this room picks up, it's always on a microphone. Every sound is picked up. So please hold your applause, hold your boos, hold any noise until after the hearing. All right, you may continue.
Thank you. The fourth condition is that the granting of the variance will not be contrary to the objectives of the ordinance. Again, the applicant fails to address that. The applicant complains about the treatment of mixed-use projects in the zoning codes and says, well, if this were strictly a commercial project, these wouldn't apply. Or if it included affordable housing, it wouldn't apply. Or if it were in the downtown specific plan, it wouldn't apply. Those are all irrelevant. This is a mixed-use project, and so it has to go by the mixed-use standards. And in fact, there are mixed-use standards in the city of Glendale. The city council has said for the commercial portion that the commercial rules apply. For the residential portion of the standards apply. In this case, the R1250 standards. And even draft finding number 4 in the staff reports notes that the project deviates from C3's mixed-use developments, but notes that mixed-use developments are recognized in the city's general plan as being beneficial use to the community. Yeah, they are. But that ignores that City Council has established specific rules for mixed-use developments, and the project would disregard practically all of them. And so as a result, granting the variances would not only be contrary to the objectives of the zoning ordinance, it would in fact negate them. And this leads to my final point, and that is that the granting of the variances would turn the purposes of having variances on its head. The variances are supposed to be granted because of special conditions that would deprive the property owner of privileges enjoyed by other properties in the same zone or property. There's nothing in the record to indicate there are any special circumstances here that are not shared by other properties in this C3 zone. So therefore, if you grant these variances, it would in fact confer special privileges on the subject property that other properties do not have, and thus it would pervert the purposes of the zoning code. And for those reasons, Madam Hearing Officer, this project does not meet the requirements for the granting of the variances, and we ask that the variances be denied. Thank you.
I do have a question for you.
Yes.
You have heard from staff, you've heard from the applicant. What is the opinion of the Ross Moines Homeowners Association on what types of use they would like to see on that property?
We would like the property to comply with the zoning code without variances.
Okay. Would you rather have residential uses with variances? Because as you've heard, there are conflicts in the code. Or would you prefer to have commercial uses? I'm just asking. Right. And a resident with the opinion of as a representative of the homeowners association.
Yes, thank you, and I understand that. We would like whatever is developed there to be developed without variances. And we saw some scare photos. Well, if we built it to 90 feet, we could build up to 90 feet. What you weren't told was that a 90-foot project would require a 45-foot setback on the rear adjacent to the R1250 apartment building. The other thing that was noted on those slides is, well, it could take between 200 and 400 parking spaces. I don't know how you could build a commercial building on that lot with a 45-foot setback in the rear and put in 400 parking spaces. You would have to tunnel down 10 stories.
Okay, so you don't have a preference. So what I'm hearing is, among the rest of it, yes, you don't have a preference if it's residential or commercial, as long as whatever's built on the site meets the code.
What we want is to meet code without variances.
All right. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person I have up, you'll have 3 minutes, would be Bruce Merritt, followed by Ray Frauenholtz.
Good morning. My name is Bruce Merritt. I am speaking here as an individual. I'm a parishioner at St. Mark's Church. St. Mark's has sent a letter which I hope you've reviewed because of its interest in the property being developed across the street. But I'm not here as a representative of the church. I'm just here speaking as an individual. I live north of Mountain, probably a mile, maybe a mile and a quarter away from this property. But I think I share interests with a lot of people in Glendale about the creep of downtown Glendale into areas that are largely residential. And notwithstanding the fact that there are commercial establishments along Brand Boulevard, that area, if you simply measure it by how far you can throw a baseball, is predominantly, overwhelmingly residential. And the people here today are there because it's a residential area that's being threatened by creep from downtown. Now, when I look at the draft report and I listen to the presentations that were made this morning, it occurs to me that what's being done is really the existing code, the existing legal regulation of development in this part of the city is being questioned. It's being challenged because there is a tension between the development standards and the C3 code. I would submit that it is not for the planning department to resolve that tension. If there is a tension, if there is something that needs to be sorted out to make development more rational in this part of the city, it's for the city council to do it. The city council has established through the C3 zoning code what the requirements are that ought to be met for development in this area, and I think the developer needs to comply with that law. To say that, well, I could build a different building and I could do this, or I could build in a different part of town, I could do that. It's a little like saying it's a hardship for me to have to pay California income tax, because if I lived in Nevada, I wouldn't have to pay any tax. And if I had no income, I wouldn't have to pay any tax. But I have income, and I live in California, and that's the law that applies, and that should be the law that applies here. And if that law doesn't make sense in every conceivable circumstance, it's up to the city council to resolve it, not this department. I would also finally add that it bothers me that the initial staff report did not even mention St. Mark's Day School across the way, a day school with 100 students, with 100 families that come and go twice a day, not even mentioned. It's one of the largest day schools in the city of Glendale. And yet the report just sort of blandly says there's no impact, no adverse impact on the surrounding neighborhood. There's obviously an adverse impact on the surrounding neighborhood. And you have to wonder why the staff can't see it. They seem to be able to see all the arguments the developer has made, including some arguments that the developer hasn't made, but they don't seem to see the very obvious problems that exist on the impact on this neighborhood. And I think that the proper outcome of this is clear, and I would ask you to find that outcome. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next, Ray Frauenholz, followed by Louis Biacolo. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Ray Frauenholz, and I'm here today with my wife, Diane Thomas. We've lived in Glendale for quite a while. For the past 15 years, we live in what is now the Ross Moyne Mountain Historic District. We're members of the Homeowners Association, share their core values, and especially maintaining the character of our residential neighborhood. During the most recent election, many citizens expressed the concern that the city had developed too quickly without thoughtful regard for the long-term consequences. Some city council members share this concern, expressing the desire for more open space than has been provided in recent projects. Diane and I welcome and support thoughtful development in keeping with the architecture and the living style of the neighborhood, while conforming to the city codes, which we need to all remember are laws. The proposed project at 1100 Brand is a large volume, 5-story mixed-use structure that would dwarf the nearby buildings. It would be 72% taller than allowed by the code. Overall, the proposal violates 8 zoning codes, ranging with variances ranging from 20 to 100%. Even so, the Glendale Community Planning Department staff has recommended approval of this proposal. Only justification is insurmountable practical difficulties, unnecessary hardship. To our knowledge, and apparently with information we've heard today, neither the developer nor the planning department has identified any or quantified any alleged difficulties or hardships. How can we allow this? We sincerely hope that this matter hasn't already been decided well before this meeting, and that all parties have conducted their business professionally and honestly. Approving this proposal would effectively rewrite the zoning codes, inviting lower standards for future developers who may seek approval for even larger projects requiring larger zoning variances. This proposal is inadequate, lacks justification, and we ask that all 8 variances be denied. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Thanks. Louis Biocolo, followed by Ellen Sennett.
My name is Louis Biocco. I had a lot of notes here, but it's already been covered, so there's no sense in going over it. But I want to bring one thing up. The parking structure, the on and off getting into the parking structure, is it going to be where a driver can see the sidewalk when he gets up before he touches the sidewalk? Or is it going to be like the rest of the apartments have? The car comes up and its nose is pointed in the air and you can't see the sidewalk, and there's accidents because of the fact that the parking garage, the driveway for the parking garage faces the church. I don't go to that church, so I have no quorums there. There again, I put it to I agree with all the people that are against the variances, all variances. If it can't be built within the code, it shouldn't be built. We have a project on Central now where California and Myrtle come to it. It's a disaster. The contractor's taken over the sidewalk and the street. You can't get by. This will happen up here because they'll have to use the street for their trucks, their vehicles, material, where they're going to load it at. They can't build a 5-story building without using the streets, and we can't block those streets. Thank you.
Thanks. Ellen Sennett, followed by Gwen Hinton.
Good morning. My name's Ellen Sennett, and I'm representing 10 other families plus my husband who would have been here, adding to the heat in the room. I'm just disappointed, and I've lost total faith in Glendale. You can say don't look at downtown, but look at downtown. And we were told, oh no, traffic will not be in any way, impeded. It's horrible. You can't take Central anymore. And that's before everybody showed up. So if we're letting that go on down there, and we see that it's a problem, it's not, in the Vista, there's the Vista. When you were over on the street, there's McDonald's, there's Wells Fargo, you would look out and you'd be like, oh, those are those beautiful California mountains that is now a big cylinder block wall. But talking about northern Glendale, we still have it, it's still nice. It doesn't have to become such an industrial area. Your presentation was beautiful. I would love to live there if it was code. My parents lived in the area, and they needed new windows. And they wanted windows that went up and down as opposed to went out. They took 9 million pictures. They were asking for the thing. No, they were told no. And that only affected their house. You can't have a fence in your yard because it's too close to the sidewalk. Well, 4 inches from the sidewalk for a huge building seems even more ridiculous. Apparently I'm nervous, but there's so much going on, and so people are so angry. And you did a great job, but you're a total cheerleader for the project, and I want to know who's going to be the cheerleader for our voice. Is it us who stand up here for 3 minutes or 10 minutes as opposed to the 25 minutes of, oh yeah, that's a really, really great concept there? I want to know who's going to be the cheerleader for the citizens of Glendale as opposed to the businesses that come in of Glendale. I've lived here for 30 years. I want to teach here. My kids go to school here. This is my community. It's not their community. It's our community. It's our home. It's our, and the rules. There can't be 2 separate sets of rules. You can't say, oh, you have to follow the rules, but you You're wearing a purple shirt, not so much. There has to be some continuity for us to have faith again in the leadership of Glendale. Thank you.
Gwen Hinton, followed by Derek Chevalier.
My name is Gwen Hinton. My husband purchased his property on Maryland Avenue in 1973. He has seen all the development. He has seen all the traffic growth. He had to work today because you wouldn't give us a nighttime meeting, so I'm here in his place and my place and for all my neighbors on North Maryland Avenue. Build to the code. That's all that we are asking. And when the only indication that I've seen that there might be a hardship on your part is financially in your pocket. You want to squeeze more development into a square foot so you can put more money in your pocket. To hell with the rest of the community. As she said, this is a community of homes with a small business development around it. We want to keep it like that. And we also find it very unfair that we have to fight to prove that somebody's not wanting to build to code. The application should be denied first, and then the developer should be able to come with his arguments for building. And the only arguments that we saw earlier were pie in the sky. None of those projects are going to be built because nobody's renting. We've already got 3,000 to 5,000 units empty being built now. Who's going to move into these? There's not any profit. There's not any money in the developments that he threatened us with, not what he's proposing. Also, physically, has anybody been down that street in the afternoon and see how much the sunlight blares onto those apartments across the street? Those are old buildings with leaded glass windows. When that western sun hits those windows of that 5-story apartment building, it is going to burn the eyeballs out of the people in those apartments. That is a hardship. Is the developer going to pay for blackout curtains? Is the developer going to pay for air conditioning for those apartments that are going to be impacted? I doubt it. That's it. Make them work to code. That's all we're asking.
Derek Chevalier, followed by Victor Mailing.
Good morning, and thank you. I think that there's been a lot of eloquent speech really just asking for quantification and for an opportunity to hear the actual arguments as quantified against existing ordinances, and I thought you did a great job of asking for that. And I didn't see it anywhere in the 106-page report. I don't see it in the planning report. I've lived in the neighborhood on Randolph for almost 16 years. And so when I see a report that says granting of variances would not materially be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the surrounding properties and neighboring developments, I'm wondering who they're talking about, because I live in there and I'm injured and I would be injured. The neighborhood will be changed. There's no question about that. And when we talk about variances that were granted to projects in 1997 and 2004, I think we'll all agree that that has no reflection on the Glendale we live in right now, or what's happening, or how many projects have been built since then. I also think that when we talk about the city looking at the peak traffic times, I think we can absolutely quantify the fact that traffic patterns will significantly change when people have actually moved into the 3,000, 4,000 units that aren't even completely filled. So we're going to have now, how can you possibly determine what the impact's going to be before we have 3,000? These are 3,000 units. According to the parking requirements of a 3-bedroom, we're talking about 10,000, 15,000 potential cars that are not going to impact. Also, my kids went to the school that's across the street at St. Mark's, and there are 3 churches in that neighborhood. Yes, it's going to impact those 3 churches and the parishioners that go to those 3 churches. How could you possibly say that those churches and the parishioners are not going to be impacted? It's ridiculous. I love the growth. I'm happy, and I do hope that there's another project. I'll be up here as a cheerleader for a project that meets the code. And I would like to say that I think that it is unfair for the planning committee or for the city to ask us to to decide what kind of project we want as in pie in the sky. So if you don't want this, what project would you want? Requiring us to determine what project would be acceptable as compared to a project that has clearly been demonstrated not to be acceptable or compliant with existing ordinances. Thank you very much.
Okay. Victor Mailing, followed by Joyce Woodruff.
Good morning. My name is Victor Melling, and while I live 8 blocks away from the proposed project, I am a member of the parish of St. Mark's across the street, to the south of the proposed project. A review of the 8 proposed variances is an appalling violation of building codes and dimensionalization of both the street and the neighborhood. A detail of these variances has already been discussed ad absurdum. However, in addition to the proposed variances, have the following been considered? How many units are proposed for low-income occupancy for both the condos or rentals of the condos? Number 2, has a full-scale environmental impact report been made for this project due to the unique combination of commercial and residential use, and for the school across the street, which faces the outpouring of cars from the proposed project? Please deny the requested variances for this project, as it will impact the neighborhood and the people within the neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we have Joyce Woodruff, followed by Bob Edwards.
Okay. My name is Joyce Woodruff. I've lived in this community over 30 years. Over 30 years. I chose this community because it had more of a small-town atmosphere. It met the qualifications that I was interested in. The services were good. I'm concerned now that the services will really be deteriorated. I'm so concerned with what has already been allowed in the community. I agree with everything that has already been said, but having lived on a neighborhood, on a street where a variance was made and a tall building went in, and building by building, the single-family dwellings became apartment and condo complexes. Of course, it really negatively affected the streets and everything else. And they kept saying, no, don't worry about it. You know, we can do these variances. It'll be fine. It's never fine. And I hope that this will all be settled in favor of those of us who are concerned about the community we love and want to still live in. Thank you.
Bob Edwards, followed by Beverly Rogers.
My name is Bob Edwards at 1245 Moncado Drive, and I think I was going to say what has already been said. So for the sake of time in that, I will relinquish my spot here for somebody who might bring something new. But as a longtime resident of the city, who has worked in the city, who has built my life in the city, I've seen so many changes here, and we don't need more. We need to sit back, think through, and slow down the progress of the city.
Beverly Rogers, followed by Susan Jontalucci.
Good morning. It's still morning, isn't it? Yeah. My name is Beverly Rogers, and I am here as a member of St. Mark's Church. And I think that our architect and the people that planned all this didn't really think about the neighbors within 3 blocks, say, of where this is going to be. They're going to plop this big building down. We have 3 churches there. There's St. Mark's. Across from St. Mark's is the Lutheran Church. Down the street a block is the Incarnation Church. And these are unusual buildings because at times they have enormous amounts of people coming in and out. For example, if it's Christmas, if it's Easter, if it's Palm Sunday, they have huge amounts of people coming down to go to church, 200 people. And this is something I don't think anybody here has considered. They act like this is a little island here, and the only people that are going to notice are the people that are living there. The parking now is horrendous. I usually, if I have to go to something like Christmas or Easter, I have to get there an hour ahead of time to find a parking place because there are no parking places available. And that's a real bad thing to happen. And now the fact that they didn't even consider that there's this daycare center right across the street, 100 people going over there. The parents like to go to this type of a daycare center and school because they can walk their child into the school. And then when the day is over, they can pick up their child. They don't have to put the child on a bus or something like that and send them off to, La La Land. Because, this is a time when you want to get to kids and you want to protect them and have them like school. Right down the street is Incarnation. They're enlarging their school too, their daycare center. And you might think that they have a nice, lovely parking lot, but if you go down there anytime, especially on Sunday or maybe Saturday or maybe Monday morning, you can see that whole parking lot is full. Across the street from St. Mark's is a library, and they have a very small area for parking. So what happens after school when these parents want to drop their kids off there and they want to pick them up, and all these people are coming home from work and everything that we don't have now? They have to deal with that. Also across the street we have a fire station, and anybody that moves into that building, I know for sure, is going to love hearing that fire truck at 8 o'clock every morning on Sunday. But anyway, there's so much going on in this area. It's not just business, it's spiritual. And they're also, by the way, in St. Mark's, just a minute, just 1 second more. We have AA meetings there. There can be 100 people at one of those AA meetings. And they're Bless Animals Days and all that. Tons of people coming in from all directions, and I don't think they've even considered this as happening.
Okay, thank you. Susan Giantalucci, followed by Patricia Bicos.
Hi, good morning. I've been so impressed by all the speakers today. They're just very, very eloquent. And I just jotted out this little thing from last night about my feelings about this project, and I'll read that in a minute. But the one thing, as I've been involved in trying to understand what's going on, is it just seems to me that there are certain zoning laws that have been put in place for this area, and that they're being totally disregarded. As a citizen of Glendale, or citizen in general, I don't quite understand why that would be allowed to the degree it's being allowed. And I just wrote a little summary, but I'll say it here. In this proposed project, the developer has chosen to ignore almost all, if not all, the zoning laws regarding this parcel of land, and for no imperative reason. And I want to note, from everything I heard today, I still feel the same way. I didn't hear anything that changed my mind. The 8 proposed variances all greatly exceed the laws set forth by the City of Glendale. The zoning laws are there for a reason. To ignore them seems to be a mockery of the law. There is absolutely no reason this project should be allowed in its present plans. It will be a betrayal of the citizens of Glendale if the Planning Board and City Council approve these variances. and I'm requesting that all 8 variances be denied, and also to add that I'm not opposed to some development, and as others on that parcel, and as others have said, as long as they follow the zoning laws. And if the zoning laws are somehow outdated, antiquated, etc., the city council needs to take that up. Thank you.
Patricia Bikos, followed by Christy Binder.
I don't do very well in speaking, and I don't do very well in front of the TV, so I'm going to read what I'm going to say. I concur with much of what's been said.
Your name?
My name is Patricia Bikos.
Thank
I
you.
live in the Ross Moines area. I grew up here, and I've been fortunate enough to still live here. I've seen many changes occur in downtown Glendale, most aggressively in the last few years. Let me put my glasses on. Now this building frenzy with code variances wants to extend itself further north from downtown Glendale into the residential neighborhood that so far has been immune to this. I'm concerned about the proposed project because this oversized construction project wants to be granted 8 variances from a building code in order to be built, and without the builder failing to demonstrate any practical difficulties or unnecessary hardship and any exceptional circumstances or conditions. Therefore, according to the zoning code, the project should not and does not meet requirements for these exceptions. The purpose for these ordinances is to protect the surrounding neighborhood from proposed structures such as this one. If a building of this size and structure was appropriate for the neighborhood, then the zoning code that has been put in place by the city would support it. The builder wants to increase building height by 72% over what is allowed, increase the number of units by 20%, increase the number of stories by 67%, increase the floor area ratio by 58%, and increase the structural coverage by 70%, and decrease setbacks by 99, 97, and 100% respectively. I don't have a problem with any kind of construction, but I do have a problem when a construction project wants to override the zoning ordinances without concrete and valid justification for doing so. If all these variances are required by the builder for this proposed project in this neighborhood, then it just doesn't belong there. Therefore, I'm asking that all 8 requested variances for 1100, 1108 North Brand be denied. Thank you.
Is Christy Binder here, or Binder? Nope. Sharon Nye, N-I-E-H. Okay. Harry Zavos, followed by Sharon Collins, if she's here.
Madam Hearing Officer, this variance application must be viewed against the policy for granting variances set out in 30.43.010 of Glendale's Municipal Code that states, the purpose of the variance is to ensure that no property, because of special circumstances applicable to it, shall be deprived of privileges commonly enjoyed by other property owners, properties in the same zone and vicinity. Comparison of this variance application to this stated purpose demands denial. First, the record is devoid of any evidence that the subject property has special circumstances not shared by other properties in the same zone that justifies granting the variances. Second, denial of these variances will not deprive the subject property of privileges commonly enjoyed by other properties in this zone. They, like the subject property, must comply with the C3 zoning requirements that the subject property by this variance application seeks to avoid. Finally, if you grant the variances, you will confer special privileges on the subject property with that all other properties within the zone that must conform with the zoning requirements do not enjoy. To grant these variances would be such an obvious perversion of the variance process, only an imagination run wild could come up with an explanation of why they would be granted. Or there can be no justification in reason to use a process intended to ensure that all properties in the same C3 zone have the same rights to develop in order to confer on one property special privileges that other similarly situated properties do not enjoy under that C3 zone.
Okay. Sharon Collins, followed by Frank Cordum.
Hello, I'm Sharon Collins. I live within 3 blocks of the property, and the only reason I'm here today, besides to support everyone else, is I wish to submit to you some photographs of what the neighborhood looks like and what the 2 buildings, the comparison buildings, which do not compare to this building at all. The comparison building on Isabel, which is considered to be a mixed use, is the Presbyterian Home for the Aging. I personally visited. I saw absolutely no mixed use. I saw the Presbyterian Home for the Aging. And unless the city considers senior citizens to somehow be commercial property there, it's not. I also went to East Colorado. I have pictures. And it is, although it is a mixed-use building, the mixed use is clearly unsuccessful because there is nothing there. And it is a small building that actually matches the motel right next door. Can I hand these to you?
Sure. Thanks. Okay, thanks. And next we'll have Frank Cordum, followed by Bill Metzdorf.
Thank you. My name is Frank Cordum. I'm a resident of Glendale, and I join in what the other residents have said so eloquently thus far. But I would add that the developer here seems to be saying that we already have some big commercial buildings in the neighborhood, so why not have one more? I don't think that's a correct way of looking at it. Just because the city lets some other ugly buildings get built doesn't mean it should abandon the zoning rules now, which is what staff appears to be doing in this case. I therefore request that all 8 requested variances be denied.
Thanks. And Bill Metzdorf, followed by Mary Shear.
My name is Bill Metzdorf. I live on the corner of Stocker and Isabel in the Ross Moines section, and I have to say that I agree completely with everything that's been said so far. I'd just like to underline a couple of things. The first is that if something is going to be built, it needs to be built according to the code that is in place. If the code needs to be changed, then that is really a function of the City Council and not of the Planning Committee, as we've already heard. If we were to go along with what the architect had been mentioning of using that space to build a commercial structure and without any variance needed, obviously it would not pencil out. Otherwise, they would build such a building. It's only going to pencil out if they don't have to put in all those parking spaces that would be required by the code. And it's only going to pencil out if they don't use some type of affordable housing there. And they didn't mention how much those condos would be selling for. To say that they would somehow provide housing that's necessary in our neighborhood is really a stretch of the imagination. So I would just like to say that I agree with the other speakers that have gone before me and just mention that I think that the variances that have been requested should be denied.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Mary Shear. I've been a resident of Glendale since 1995, and I'm angry I have to be here today because I'm taking away from my kids' summer vacation. It's not my job to talk about building codes and these types of things because I don't have any authority to speak on that. However, when my husband and I restored 2 homes in Glendale, we followed all the codes.
every law that was put in place. And I think this developer needs to do the same thing. If it says 3 stories, then 3 stories. And 50% of the lot, not 85% of the lot. I think development creep is the perfect term to use in this situation. And if you say that there is no impact on the parking, then you don't drive in that area every day like I do with my kids. We shop at Trader Joe's. The parking there is a nightmare. The parallel parking is dangerous. And 2.5 cars per person moving into that building will be horrible, and it will impact the area. Thank you.
Robert Bush, followed by Mary Lou Montaigne, or Montana.
We're not sitting together, but we're married. I don't have any notes, so I'll just second what my wife said, and I think what Sean said most of all. I guess the same point that everyone else made. I just wish, it's not that I'm against the building, I just wish that it was scaled down. You ask what we prefer. I think we do prefer residential, but I just think that we want the building scaled down and kept within the code parameters. I'm a little confused about why we're talking about the buildings on the other side of Brand. I understand that it's the same kind of zoning, but I don't think any of us consider the buildings on the west side of Brand to be really part of our neighborhood, the tall buildings. So it just seems like that's sort of a little island dividing the neighborhood on the other side from our neighborhood. I don't think that those buildings should be considered about what should be built on the east side of Brand. As far as the parking goes, I find it a little questionable whether just because there's subterranean parking, that's where everybody's going to be parking. I think subterranean parking is usually pretty inconvenient. I know with all of the buildings in our neighborhood, all of the apartments, they all have parking under their buildings, but their cars all creep up the street, and that's where everybody parks. Everybody parks on the street. Nobody goes under their buildings to park. So I think that should be considered. I also am a little disappointed with the presentation that from the developer saying, well, if you think this is bad, let me tell you what we could build here. I don't enjoy being, I don't want to be frightened into saying, oh, well, what you're going to build isn't the worst thing that could be built. So I think that's a little disingenuous to say, I could build this, I could build this, I could build this. It's worse. So therefore, you should appreciate what I want to build. So thank you.
Thanks. Mary Lou Montagna, followed by Michael Lee.
Good morning, Mary Lou Montagna. I'm here as a resident. I am sitting with my husband, however, and together we have almost 90 years living in Glendale. And I'm not going to take up more time. I just want you to know that I am in agreement with those who are opposed to this, and I hope that it's turned down. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Is Michael Lee here? Nope. Carolyn Beaton? Left? Okay. Albert Babanian?
My name is Albert Babanian. I'm a real estate broker in Glendale for the last 25 years, specializing in selling condos. I feel kind of funny because I'm the first person coming up to be in favor of this project, and I know we have a lot of people against this project. As far as this building is concerned, and as far as working with people that are looking for purchasing condos, and they contact me, this is an amazing design. This is something that everybody's dreaming. A lot of older people that approach me they want to buy a condo that is built to this spec, big, beautiful, and sunny in that kind of location. I sold many units across the street on Brand and Stalker. That's an old building. And there were a lot of people who were very much interested on a top floor unit. As far as the developer is concerned, I work with this developer. He's does a quality work. He built a beautiful project on California, met all the green requirement, made outlets for all the cars, for the chargers. I mean, this guy does a quality job. So for knowing, understanding what the demands are for this city, this thing is a great project. And this is like a mini version of all the bigger projects that are being built. And there will be a lot of people who will be interested in this place. Okay?
Thank you.
Could I take Carolyn Beaton's spot? I'm diabetic and I need to go.
Sure. Did you already submit a form?
I did. I'm Richard Lee Berry.
Number 38. 32. Okay, thanks.
32.
Good morning. I'm Richard Lee Berry. I've lived in Cortez Drive for 51 years, same house. I don't think we should even be here because I attended the city council meeting when they had the zoning meeting, and they discussed, I asked the question at the zoning meeting, how far would the expansion go? And they said it would stop at Glen Oaks Boulevard on Brand. And if that's the case, then this particular parcel shouldn't even be under discussion, because it was my opinion when I left that meeting that the downtown expansion would stop at Glen Oaks Boulevard. So therefore, my neighbor and myself, David Kane, who had attended that meeting, felt that finally Glendale's expansion northward would stop there. But obviously, somehow or other, that's not the case. But I agreed with the comments earlier saying that, the other people had mentioned that, they felt that we should have this meeting at the city council, not here at the planning commission. So that's my big complaint. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay. Is Joe Kazazian here? Followed by Douglas Green.
Good morning.
Whoops. Oh, it's Joe Kazazian first.
Oh, I thought there was no one here for that.
That's
all right.
Good morning. It's still a morning. My name is Joe Kazazian. I'm a Glendale resident for 25 years already. I saw the project. I think it's very beautiful. I'm all for it. I don't mind living in one of those beautiful buildings. Thank you.
Okay.
I should have stayed up here. I can read all this, and it's an absolute redundancy to everything that's been said. Basically, I am completely against the project. If they want to build it according to code, I think it's fine. In fact, I would encourage that. I believe basically the underlying cause as to why they want the variances is basically financial. What they're doing is they're designing a building for that property that basically maximizes the profit. And there's been several court cases that a variance will not be issued or allowed that covers just for the profit motive. With the buildings that we were threatened with originally by the builder or developer, he's not going to build any of those buildings because they're not profitable. So I'm not the least bit worried, and I really take offense to that. And that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. I have Mr. Gonzalez, followed by Joshua Reynolds.
Good morning. I'm Miss Gonzalez. I've lived in Glendale for 23 years now, and I put together a few of my thoughts, absolutely 100% behind what all the people have mentioned up until now and the ones that will be following me against this project here on Grand Boulevard. This development plan submitted to the City of Glendale is not complementary to a positive influence on the entire nearby neighborhood. Its submission for review should not automatically entitle the owner of this property for an automatic approval. It would be a horrific eyesore in this quaint section of Brand Boulevard. It would ruin the small-town feel of the area which homeowners and tenants alike enjoy about most in this section. Dryden is a one-lane in each direction street, which is already so heavily trafficked, not only by the school, the church, but the neighboring tenants and homeowners of the area. This plan, if approved, will permanently remove views for thousands of neighbors in the area, ruining their view forever, not just temporarily. The noise is already a very serious issue in this area. I happen to live at above in the Brand Mountain area. Loud, indiscreet tenants, ignorant drivers behind the wheels of eardrum-breaking loud vehicles racing up and down Brand 24 hours a day, 7 days a week would pale in comparison to the noise emanating from this catastrophe. An open barbecue area there would be what I would like to jump into if these plans are accepted. Parking is currently so scarce because of Nestle employees, Trader Joe's employees, and Walgreens employees. Proposed plan does not guarantee additional parking for hundreds of people who currently are looking for parking spaces. The owner-developer said this morning, we could even build a private club. Hello, Mr. Alajajian. This entire neighborhood does not want your proposed project in our neighborhood. Hear and please listen to us. Our words, we don't want your project in this area. And lastly, please do not, the City of Glendale, please do not ruin Brand Boulevard north of Glen Oaks by approving this project, which is clearly intended to fill the financial pockets of this owner-developer. Please take into consideration all of our comments, both verbal and written, against approving this catastrophic eyesore. Thank you.
Okay. Joshua Reynolds, followed by Mary Keller.
Hello, Madam Hearing Officer. Thank you. Thank you. I'm really just here to stand in support of all those in opposition. The one thing that stands out to me that the developer is stating is the hardship part of the statement. And I just want to reiterate and support the statement that complying with existing zoning law, as much as complying with any law is a hardship, it does not qualify. So if they were able to present any sort of material evidence of how what that hardship is, whether it be financial, environmental, et cetera, that might stand. But in this instance, I don't think it does. That was pretty much it. I'm going to cede my time to my more eloquent, beautiful wife. So thank you.
Thanks. Mary Keller, followed by Mark Perlman.
Hello, my name is Mary Keller, and I live on North Maryland, 1 block away from the proposed construction. I just want to emphasize that I do not live in downtown, and I do not want to live in downtown. It seems that a lot of the exceptional circumstances that the developer is trying to use is really that they're trying to comply with urban planning or best practices in urban planning. But this is not an urban area. Specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about my section of North Maryland. The majority of the buildings and residences on that street were actually built in the 1920s. And many of us only have single-car garages and shared driveways. There's also parking available only on one side of the street. So when you talk about an impact on parking, this will really be felt within just 1 block away from this development. In addition to that, this block is also the home to many elderly residents. And so if they are not able to park very close to their home, this is a real problem. And there have been many days when I have had to help elderly people with their walkers, people who've really had to park 2-3 blocks away because things have become so dense already in that neighborhood. So for those and the reasons already stated by all of my neighbors, I would like to ask you to deny the 8 variances. Okay, thank you.
Mark Perlman, followed by Melinda Janger.
Yes. Good morning. I am here in opposition of this project, and I'd like to bring up just a couple of things that I think that we who live in the community enjoy and haven't mentioned here, but they are important to us. First off is that, as the woman said regarding the parking on Maryland, I live in the corner of Louise and Randolph, and I have a 2-story home, and we drove around the area for over a year looking for the right piece of property to buy. This was not on the market at the time, and I kept praying, although I'm not a religious person, for that piece to come on the market, and it finally did, and we snapped it up because the quality of the housing that was built, the history of the houses in that area, all very nice, all perfect Glendale. As a matter of fact, my particular corner was used as the enticement postcard by the city of Glendale with 4 different types of architecture to bring people into the area to live here as a quiet community. Building this building will not honor that our city fathers originally set up here, was this nice quiet community. You can raise your children safely, have a great neighborhood, know your neighbors, you know, just enjoy life as we want to in the city of Glendale. There are downtown areas in major cities that are, if that's the kind of thing that you want to do, I'm sure there's property available that's dilapidated that this builder can go to. My argumentative question is, would anybody allow this to happen in Kenneth Village? Would this even be a discussion? Because that is so quaint that to propose this type of building in that area would be completely wrong, and I don't think you'd have enough seats or standing room for that to happen in here. Continuing, and I still have time, which is good, the building that is proposed at this height would be an intrusion upon the privacy of residents that would be living behind it. Whether the terrace is on the 4th floor or the 5th floor, you will be able to see into the adjoining neighborhoods. Okay? And I don't have the math to show that, and I don't really, I think, need to do that. I think we can all kind of visualize that. Speaking of math, I thought it was very interesting, as well as rude, to prove the number of cars based on the proposed heights of buildings that could have been placed there, and trying to, again, as it was mentioned by others, to scare us into accepting the building that they want to build as opposed to what they could have. So for me, that's tantamount to, you can shoot me in the foot or I can shoot myself in the foot. Either way, this is not going to work. So I propose that all 8 variances be denied, and thank you for my time.
Melinda Janger, followed by Donald Zachary.
Good morning. I've lived in Glendale for close to 70 years now, and I've noticed that it has changed from a quiet, quaint community into a very, very urban, very, very well-developed area. I chose to live north of Glen Oaks because of the quaintness. I believe that a building like this will destroy that, especially on the east side. You may have noticed dental offices going in where there was a florist, but they kept it to the one story. They kept it very true to the original architecture, and I appreciate that. I would love to see that corner developed maybe into a one-story restaurant and maybe one more story of commercial, but certainly not this. This looks like a bank building, or it looks like a very commercial building. And I understand variances can only be granted if there are hardships on the developer. So far, I haven't heard any. The only one I can surmise is avarice and greed. And I hate to see that coming to Glendale. Thank you very much.
Oh, would you mind stating your name for the record, please?
Certainly. Melinda Junger, J-U-N.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Stadler. Thank you for the time. I'm an interested party because my wife and I live within a mile of this location, and we often walk the area. I don't think the developer, in this case, the applicant, has met its burden of proof, particularly with regard to standards A and C, but I want to focus mostly on the setback requirements. To remind myself of how awful this building will be, I came over here this morning driving down Central Avenue, and the city has gone in an absolute wrong direction because it's a wall of building with no appeal and no human scale. In contrast, my wife and I happened to be in Portland a couple of weeks ago, and even in an urban area, you have wide sidewalks with ability of pedestrians to use the city. There's no demonstrated reason for having no setbacks here. I'd like Recess Restaurant, and I'd like to see it remain, but I'd like a building that people can use and continue to enjoy the neighborhood. And I don't think the developer in this case has met its burden of proof, and therefore, particularly with regard to the setback requirements, excuse me, but also with regard to the other variances, I would recommend that all of them be denied. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And if you don't mind stating your name and for the record as well.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry I didn't. My name is Don Zachary.
Okay, Don Zachary. Thank you.
Kim Murphy, followed by Hazel Catmull.
And just a reminder, if everyone can, at the beginning of your presentation, if you can just state your name for the record. That way, in case the videotape or for some reason gets cut off and we miss the introduction by Laura, then at least we know who is speaking. Thank you.
For the record, my name is Gene Autry. Actually, my name is Kim Murphy. And there's really little that I can add, being in opposition to this project as well, other than the fact that I wish the City Council were here to hear this, but for the city, the politics and the politicians of the city, including the Planning Commission, I hope there is a sense of the frustration and the sense that we feel almost impotent when it comes to slowing things down or making our feelings known. My wife my wife was raised in Glendale, my wife of 52 years, so I was basically raised in Glendale also. But we call it now, instead of the Jewel City, it's the Big Box City. Mm-hmm. And the charm of Glendale has rapidly diminished. The environmental integrity of the city has diminished. And I think the reason there's so much concern about this particular building, and I don't know this man, but I'm sure he's probably a nice guy, but I felt a slick development, sleaziness about the comments, in all honesty. And But I think the reason that this particular building is of such concern is downtown Glendale and Central and so forth are basically gone in terms of what they could have been. And then this just represents the tip of the iceberg in terms of this creep is a perfect word, but in terms of what could potentially happen outside of the sadness that has occurred in the downtown portion of our city. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Hazel, followed by Hike Tate.
Hazel Catmull. I am against granting the variances to the gentleman, sleazy as he may be, but what is happening to Glendale is a shame. It's slowly encroaching right up, and it will go on unless you start denying variances ad lib to everybody who comes and asks for them. If it's a private person, it's hard for them to get them, but when they're financially viable, it's not so hard. I think everybody before me has spoken very, very well, and I'm not going to give you more of it. I think you've heard all of us that we're very much against this project, this particular project. Nobody's against having a building, but stick to the code that Glendale has put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Hike Tate, followed by Richard Berry.
Good day. I'm Hike Tate, and I am for this project. I think it's a great addition to our neighborhood. I personally think that the building renderings don't do it justice. I'm a young professional. I'm a graphic artist. So when I look at the renderings, I could see that a lot of the building materials that are going to be used for the project aren't accurate as far as how it's going to look. I think it's going to look a lot better than what you see here. I'm not a very good public speaker. I'm pretty nervous right now, to be quite frank. But as a resident of Glendale, born and raised, I think my wife and I would enjoy living in a place like this. Thank you.
Okay. Richard Berry?
You spoke already.
Oh, okay. And John Howell, followed by Karen Lowe.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you, John Howell. I, with two others, own a building at Dryden and Louise. It's a three-story 1928 apartment building with 18 units and 10 parking places. So I'm a real estate guy, and I can tell you that our tenants are already scrambling for parking. You mentioned my name in the letter that I sent in, and I appreciate that you acknowledge receiving it and have an opportunity to review it. I do have a bit of a concern that it took 2 weeks for it to find its way to you after I consulted with CEQA counsel and so advised the city. So I learned at 5:07 yesterday that you'd be receiving this. My concern is that the staff report, they say it addressed my concerns, but I believe that they rushed retroactive application, and a thorough, even-handed review would have arrived at the conclusion that there is a substantial evidence to support a fair argument requiring an EIR, language given me by my CEQA counsel, namely that the aesthetics have a dramatic effect on the neighborhood, and staff's recommendation that you dramatically deviate from the planning rules calls for an environmental review. We have to assume, and many have spoken to this already, but that the planning and zoning for the city was done deliberately and thoughtfully. It was also done as a public and open citywide process, and EIR helped guide that deliberation. Staff now asks you to take it upon yourself to put aside the plan that came out of this process in favor of one they deemed to be more suitable for the area. Staff asks you to reinterpret the law. And what is to suggest that staff will not welcome similar non-conforming projects up and down Brand Boulevard in the future. So I think an EIR is required, or proceed to City Council to modify the law. I'd like to speak for a second on the variances. Staff correctly states, and another fellow spoke about 5 speakers before as to the standard. Staff correctly states the standard for determining whether variances are appropriate. Are there exceptional circumstances and conditions applicable to the subject property that do not apply generally to other properties in the same zone and neighborhood? Staff identifies, yes, they say there are 3. 2 of them, one is that the site is on a street corner, which provides extra visual space around the building as well as extra distance on 2 elevations for access to light and air circulation and maintenance of some measure of privacy compared to a mid-block site. To me, that sounds like a benefit, which is proven by their next comment, which says Brand Boulevard, with its extremely wide right-of-way, greatly extends those same visual and light, air, and privacy benefits of a typical street corner location. So those are both benefits. They're not detriments. What are the unique characteristics of a property that would cause one to be hamstrung from doing what the guy next door cannot do? And their third, just real quickly, the third point they bring up is irrelevant. They say this stretch of North Brand Boulevard is developed in a considerably more intense pattern than almost all other C3 zones locations. Any reference to anything other than the particular site are irrelevant and should be ignored. Therefore, there's no basis upon which to grant the variances. Thank you.
Karen Lowe, followed by Gerald Blair.
Hello, my name's Karen Lowe. I would like to commend my neighbors who are in opposition for this. I think they've stated pretty eloquently why this building does not fit in with the character that you have in this area. And I would like to invoke the great American philosopher Jerry Seinfeld, who in an episode that many of you might recall, he goes to pick up a car that he had made a reservation for. And the woman behind the counter says, the mid-sized car you've come for isn't here. And he said, but that's what I made a reservation for. And she said, well, it's not here. And he said, well, do you know what a reservation is? And she says, yes, I do. Well, clearly you don't, because the car is not here. The parallel I'm trying to make is that there are rules, there are reservations, there are regulations. The idea behind making those is that we will all follow those. So if somebody who comes to you with a proposal doesn't meet with those rules and regulations, then it shouldn't be permitted. Having seen the complex that you're proposing, I actually am in favor of a mixed-use place as long as it conforms to the regulations and the character of the neighborhood. And I don't, as pretty as that building is, and I think it is a lovely building, I don't think it conforms to the nature of that area of Glendale. And I think what you're hearing here from people is the fear of the camel's nose under the elephant. Everybody knows what Exhibit A looks like, as somebody described it as the big box portion of Glendale. We all have watched that happen in kind of quiet horror in this area. And so we see this as kind of the beginning of that coming into an area that we thought we were told was protected. So if in some way, in some other carnation, you could redesign this building to fit in with this neighborhood, I think you would be welcome, as long as you meet the rules, just like everybody else. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, I did receive a card from Gerald Blair, and I'm just asking, I do have a written statement. I don't know if he wants to speak or not, so I'm asking if he changes his mind, decides he wants to speak, he's welcome to do so. Okay, I don't see anybody then. Is there anybody else here who hasn't spoken, who wishes to speak? Have you already spoken? No? Okay, maybe I missed it. So what is your name, please? You come forward, please, and we'll make sure you have one. We have a speaker, another speaker's form? Okay, when you're done, if you'd please fill that out.
Good morning. My name is Chris Wilson. I have lived in Glendale since 1980. I'm a current resident of North Maryland Avenue. I've lived there for 23 years. And I'm coming here today because I'm deeply concerned about the proposed project at 1108 North Brand. Because of its size and its mass, it's just completely incompatible with our neighborhood. I've seen the draft photo of the proposed apartment complex, and to me, I feel it's a monstrosity. If it is allowed to be built, it will destroy the quaint neighborhood by extending the newly overbuilt downtown Glendale to above Glen Oaks Boulevard, which, by the way, previous City Council member Quintero repeatedly assured Glendale citizens that this was not going to happen above Glen Oaks. I have reviewed all 8 variances requested by the developer, and not one of these variances meets the City of Glendale's zoning code. By allowing these variances to pass, the city will be eliminating the zoning standards that serve to protect this neighborhood. Furthermore, the proposed project has not met the requirements for granting of the variances. The developer has not demonstrated any practical difficulties or hardships or any exceptional circumstances or conditions that are required for granting a variance. Therefore, I respectfully request that all 8 variances for this proposed project be denied. After all, when is enough of building these mass apartment complexes in our city? Thank you.
Thanks. Is there anybody else who has not had a chance to speak who wishes to speak on this hearing? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody respond to that. I would like to then call forward the applicant, R. Malajagian or Rodney Kahn, for rebuttal.
Certainly. Good afternoon now, Ms. Stotler. I'll try to address the comments that I've heard, at least as many as I can get to. The first, there were comments made that hopefully the City Council is watching this, or that the City Council should be addressing this, or the City Council should be ruling on this. From our perspective, we would welcome the City Council looking at this. We would welcome the City Council addressing these mixed-use types of projects. But that's not the process that's been established. The process that's been established is what we're doing here today, which is to apply for these requests, come before you as the planning hearing officer, make our arguments, and then proceed accordingly. Comments were made. A gentleman mentioned how many affordable units are included in this project. I think it was a little confusing. There are no affordable units in this project. There was a couple speakers that mentioned about an environmental impact report, whether it was required or why was it not required. It is not for us as the applicants to determine our environmental document. If we propose a project, we submit an initial study. That initial study was submitted. Environmental analysis was performed, looking at many different items, and the conclusion was that a mitigated negative declaration was the appropriate CEQA document. One of the folks spoke about the east side of Brand versus the west side of Brand, and that they don't see the west side of Brand as being part of their area or neighborhood. They may not, but in terms of looking at the context for the area, in terms of looking for the zoning of the area, and in terms of looking at the buildings in the area, we look at Brand Boulevard, both the east side and the west side. There are issues in the area related to parking. Once again, I can attest to that. My offices are at 1111 North Brand, and I've been there for 15 plus years. I know this area very well. A lot of their parking issues relate to a number of the apartment buildings in the area being older and not having sufficient parking for their own tenants and residents. Our project would provide all of the code-required parking, plus guest parking, plus a few extra. The one lady said very kindly that this is not, in her vision, an urban area, and I believe that she meant that. But this is an urban area. This is not the downtown area. This is not San Fernando Road area, but it is an urban area. One gentleman spoke of, excuse me, in terms of frustration, and a few people have spoken out about frustration, and I agree that that's where a lot of this is coming from. I think the frustration that people have felt for projects that have been developed, built, approved, or under construction in the downtown area, and they're concerned about creep into their area. I would not envision this project as being creep. I don't look at this project at the scale and the magnitude of the projects in the downtown area. This is a very different scale project. This is a very different contextual area. I don't look at an 1.8 unit project as being massive and out of scale for this area. In terms of the development standards are in conflict with and inconsistent with what your general plan is stating and what the design guidelines state. I say that again. They are. Whether people say you should be following no variances, no code, but we'd still like to see a mixed-use project, you can't do it. You can't do it. So if that's the concept or if that's the direction we're looking at doing, that doesn't make sense. You can't have a mixed-use project without the variances. Excuse me. To conclude, we can confirm that the regulations that are in effect do not allow for a mixed-use project on this site. There are a number of different findings that we feel have been made, whether the neighbors feel they've been made, I feel they've been made, is not the appropriate decision maker. It's whether you feel they've been made, and we believe that they have. I'll conclude my remarks, and thank you for listening to my comments.
I don't have any other questions, so thank you. Okay, I'm now closing the public hearing. This case will be taken under submission, and I will be preparing my decision. There are no further items on the agenda, so this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you for coming.